Hello. Today we're gonna talk about things that are gonna be related to a totally new series I am about to start uh, on my channel. This series will be fully related to climates of other countries, different countries. I will start by examining the climate types, climate zones of different countries by their size. So in this, size and population. So in this video, it's gonna be about India. The next video is gonna be about China, then USA, then Indonesia, if I'm not wrong, and so on. So prepare yourself from at least a few weeks of this type of videos, and I'm absolutely sure it's gonna be very a fun experience. I'm gonna try to explain the things as simply as possible in order for you to understand and know just more about weather in your country or in other countries. So today our topic is India climate. India is a country actually that is much warmer than a lot of people imagine because it's a very large country. A lot of people live here, about 25% of the world population, if I'm not mistaken. So a lot of people would assume it has a similar climate as, for example, countries of the Western civilization, like, I don't know, Germany, Poland, where I live, but also US, Iceland, a lot of countries. But actually, no. Actually, India is a very warm, very humid country that can be also cold or even below zero at some times. But it's important to remember that it falls into the tropical category of climate and subtropical, but subtropical is still not the same as a temperate climate. So when we think of India, we should not be thinking of a typical cycle of four seasons like spring, summer, fall, or autumn, depending from where you are, and then winter. You must think actually of two or even three seasons that are the first season, the monsoonal season, is the wet season. With relatively warm air, very high apparent temperature, the temperature that you feel like is it actually warmer than it is really, because our thermoregulation is impaired by the amount of moisture in the air, and therefore it's the type of the it's part of the year where there is warm, very warm, cloudy, and rainy. And there is a second part of the year when it is slightly cooler, but in some parts it may be even hotter. And there are light winds, no or almost no rain, and it's the dry season. And some people will assume, and a lot of people seem to think, that it is something that defines a monsoon. But it's actually much more complicated, because a monsoon is not a type of climate. It's actually a weather system, a wind system. So that means that it's actually related to wind patterns more than to something you can read by just simply looking at a climatogram. So if you know something about geography, you would know that actually a monsoon can be best explained as a pattern of reversing wind. So wind that flows in one direction for about a half a year and in a completely opposite direction for another half a year or so. and it's actually not something that is that happens only in East Asia. Some pseudo monsoons can happen in a lot of places around the world, but in this place it's the most prominent. Like, it's a very prominent feature of this part of our world, and we need to remember this before we will try to think of any climate related to countries like Korea, Japan, India, Thailand, China, etc. Any Eastern Asia country will be deeply affected by the monsoon and cannot be thought of in the same way as we think, for example, of European or American climates situated even in a similar latitudes. So with that in mind, let's start with the India and talk about a monsoon, because we now know that the winds are coming from opposite or roughly opposite directions, and the direction changes throughout the year, but it may be not so obvious first why this happens and what exactly it means that this happens. So why this happens? Well, because we have a very large land and surrounded by a sea that actually behaves very differently when it comes to how it emits radiation and how the radiation is an opposite of how it's called, an opposite of emitting, absorbing. So it's and in this matter, the land and the water behave very differently. So the water will tend to stay at the relatively same temperature throughout the year, while in the continent will be warmer than water in the summer and colder in a winter. And what that means, there is a difference in the temperature. And when there is a difference in the temperature, as we know, the nature doesn't like differences. It wants a lot of things to be equal. So just like with air pressure, it tries to do something with this difference in temperature and forms a pressure system that is always higher where the colder air is. So in the summer, it will be the high pressure will be surrounding the Indian subcontinent from the sea, and above the land they will be a low pressure area, and the opposite could be expected, for example, in January, February, or any month of the winter. And you need to know this before we start our talking about the second consequence of the monsoon, that is how it affects day-to-day weather. So, actually, Indian Meteorological Service, I don't remember how it's exactly called, but something like that, it publishes a predicted day of the monsoon start and end. In this case, the monsoon refers not to the whole wind pattern, but to the wet season. Actually, a wet season is a much broader topic than just monsoons, but it can be summarized as something deeply related to a monsoon. And in East Asia, we will have a large pattern that extends for many countries, that is all about just that, so a dry and a wet season. And it's kind of important to know when will the wet season start, since and agriculture heavily depends on it. You need to know how to plan your vacations, so you're not gonna end in the middle of a thunderstorm. And all of this is what you need to know, and what these services are trying to tell you. They are not 100% accurate, but they will tell you that in this day you can expect weather to become much rainier, much cloudier, etc. And actually, in some parts of India, there is a third season, especially on the north, just before the wet monsoon. We have a very warm, some kind of a spring, very warm spring, very with a very high temperatures. And that is important because it forms a pattern of 3 seasons instead of 2 wet and dry or 4 seasons we think of when we think of middle latitudes. No, they are actually 3 separate seasons in this part of the world. Another topic deeply related to Eastern Asia and all of these regions are tropical cyclones. Tropical cyclones, also called a hurricane, a typhoon, depending on where exactly it is like a system of a very strong wind, one of the strongest in the world, that drains its energy from the very warm water. So the very warm water is needed for it to develop. And since, as we said, India is relatively close to the equator, surrounded by warm water, we can expect it to have been affected by a lot of different types of typhoons, as they are called in this part of the world, because we have hurricanes. When you think of hurricanes, we should think of North America and USA. They are actually cyclones. Cyclones is also a name for all wind that's rotating in a cyclonic way. I talked about it in my previous videos, but all you need to know is that this type of wind that affects the Indian country is actually the typhoon. And just like with every country in Eastern Asia. Okay, so now what climate exactly we can find? Because we know it's deeply affected by a monsoon. We know that in the different parts of the country the monsoon will arrive at different times, but what actually are the climate that are affecting India? So I'm just googling the India Köppen map. Köppen was a very smart guy that invented a type of a way of determining the climate and classifying it into one of many categories. And they are 5 major categories. You don't need to know it all, but it's good to know that we have 2 categories that are important when it comes to India. A is a tropical climate, tropical, so warm, rainy, with a potential for development of rainforests and all of fauna and flora related to it. And it is most prevalent in the southern part of the country. There is a B category climate, so a climate that is dry, and it's all that defines this climate. It's dry. This is where the steppes and the deserts will be found, and it is very common in the western part of India, closer to the center of the Asia, because Asia is a very large continent, and inside of it we will find a lot of area that have desert-like climate. And we have a temperate climate, so not warm, not dry, kind of in the middle. And this climate is found in the north of the India. And these are the three main types of climate that affect the India. And this is something that it's really good to know, like what we are actually talking about when we're talking about climate zones, etc. That they are actually 5 or 6 ways the climate can be divided, but the main one we are talking about here is A, very warm tropical climate, so a rainforest, a lot of rain. The B, the dry climate, so good weather and little to no rain. And C, temperate climate, that is something in the middle of everything of this, not something very particularly characteristic. Okay, and I think this covers our topic of India climate, obviously not in the most detailed way, but in a way you can understand, and in a way I'm able to speak to you because I just don't like to speak for a longer times. So it's all I wanted to share with you. See you next time. As I said, this series will be continued actually at least once a week. So thank you. Bye bye.